Time now for the international papers. Elena Casas is with us here on set. You're talking Egypt today. It's all over the papers, isn't it?
Yeah, let's start with the constitutional crisis there. Now, it's a complicated situation where now the liberal and leftist parties have pulled out of the Constituent Assembly that's meant to be writing Egypt's new constitution. That's because they think it's too dominated by Islamist parties, by the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafists. Those parties together hold 65 seats in that 100-seat Constituent Assembly. So that's not the only row going on, though. Not only are the liberals and leftists unhappy, but as the Egypt Independent explains, a row has also broken out between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, the military, who are still in control. They've had a bit of a war of words since the Muslim Brotherhood accused the army on Saturday of trying to rig the upcoming elections, which are set, of course, for the 23rd and 24th of May. They said they were trying to impose their own candidate. The military fired back by saying they were going to do no such thing. So what's really going on? Well, the Egypt Independent says that while a lot of the liberal and leftist parties, the people who took to the streets in those protests in Tahrir Square, have long been saying that the Muslim Brotherhood and the army are basically colluding together to try and stop the more revolutionary, more radical parties taking up power. So is this a real row between the Muslim Brotherhood and the military, or has it been fabricated to try and make it look for the liberals and leftists like there's division there? Well, the Egypt Independent thinks that yes, it is a real row. The Muslim Brotherhood has had a difficult relationship with the army going back for years. The army apparently was trying to impose their own presidential candidate, who was someone very close to Mubarak, who the Muslim Brotherhood could never accept. So they've put forward one of the names of one of their most influential leaders instead. They're trying to persuade the army to back that because they want to tell the army, well, the alternative is you either accept our man or you'll have a much more leftist, a much more liberal candidate who you just won't be able to work with. But it is definitely a complicated situation. And as the Arabist explains in an editorial today, this could all make it more likely that some kind of military coup is carried out in Egypt, because if that Constituent Assembly that's writing the constitution doesn't have very much legitimacy for ordinary Egyptians, and they can just see different parties rowing with one another, that's going to make it easier for the military in the long run to either carry out a full-on coup or what the paper calls a soft coup, which would mean deciding to further postpone the transition to democracy, postpone that election that's coming up.
Well, we're staying in the Middle East now. The Arab League, subject of today's focus, in fact, here on France 24, meeting in Baghdad today. Do the papers have high hopes for this summit?
Well, have a look at this cartoon in the National. It shows Baghdad, or the Arab League summit rather, as a showcase for the new Baghdad. But as you can see, you've got police there with magnifying glasses looking down potholes and under cars and around corners to make sure there aren't any snipers hanging around. You can quite clearly see the implication, though, that this new cleaned-up Baghdad is just sort of two streets that have been cleaned up to make it look presentable to the Arab League, when the situation itself is not quite such a showcase at all. The Atlantic is asking today if Iraq can use the opportunity to rebuild its relationships with some of its neighbours. They say that in lots of ways this is already a coup for Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. The other Arab League leaders long refused to come to Baghdad, saying it was too unsafe. So just the fact that he's been able to host it looks good for him, and he could play it in such a way that it's going to be good for him with the Iraqi street as well. He could get more foreign investment, better trade relations, that kind of thing out of this. But also, he's got a difficult relationship with Sunni Arab leaders because he himself, al-Maliki, is a Shiite. He's known particularly to have been close to Bashar al-Assad in the past. And, of course, Syria is going to be one of the main topics of conversation at that summit. So, according to The Atlantic, he's still trying to tread a thin line between the Sunni Arab leaders and Bashar al-Assad. He's still trying not to upset either of them.
And you mentioned Syria. Kofi Annan's spokesman saying Assad has agreed to the peace plan. Do the papers hope it might work?
In a word, not really. The Guardian calls this devious diplomacy in its editorial today, but they still think it's a route worth pursuing. Why? Well, they say both the Arab League and Assad would be entering this in bad faith, but if they can be convinced they can use the scheme to trap one another, maybe it could be used to help get more humanitarian assistance into Syria.
That's the international papers with Elena Casas every day here on France 24.